December 30th, 2025. The date that changed everything in the Gulf. Saudi warplanes streaked across the pre-dawn sky over Yemen's port city of Mukalla. Their target? Not Houthi rebels, not Iranian proxies, but ships carrying weapons from their supposed ally, the United Arab Emirates. The coalition's spokesperson, Major General Turki al-Maliki, stood before cameras with damning evidence. 2 vessels had entered Mukalla port from Fujairah in the UAE. They disabled their tracking systems, a deliberate act of concealment. Inside those ships, over 80 military vehicles, containers packed with weapons and ammunition, all destined for separatist forces threatening Saudi Arabia's southern border. The strikes were surgical, limited, precise, no casualties, no collateral damage, but the message was unmistakable. Saudi Arabia had just bombed assets linked to the UAE, a country they'd stood shoulder to shoulder with for decades, a country they'd waged wars alongside, a country that was supposed to be their closest regional partner. Within hours, Yemen's Presidential Leadership Council, backed by Riyadh, issued an unprecedented demand. All UAE forces must leave Yemen within 24 hours. Not a request, an ultimatum. Saudi Arabia's cabinet declared their national security a red line they would defend at any cost. The kingdom, they stated, would not hesitate to take necessary steps to confront any threat. The UAE's response was swift but measured. Their foreign ministry categorically rejected any attempt to implicate them in tensions between Yemeni parties. They expressed surprise at the Saudi strikes, but by day's end, reality set in. Abu Dhabi announced the withdrawal of all its forces from Yemen, ending what they called their counter-terrorism mission. The damage, however, was already done. For the first time in modern Gulf history, 2 heavyweight powers had crossed from cold rivalry into open military confrontation. The question everyone was asking, how did we get here? To understand this divorce, we need to rewind to when Saudi Arabia and the UAE were inseparable. These weren't just allies, they were the twin engines of Gulf power, the undisputed leaders of the Sunni Arab world, the heavyweights that shaped regional politics through the Gulf Cooperation Council and OPEC. When Yemen's civil war erupted in 2015, they formed a military coalition together. The goal seemed clear: push back the Iranian-backed Houthi rebels, restore the internationally recognized government. Side by side, Saudi and Emirati forces fought what they believed was a shared battle against Iranian expansion in their backyard. When Qatar got too cozy with Iran and Turkey, threatening the regional order, Saudi Arabia and the UAE didn't hesitate. From 2017 to 2021, they led a blockade against Doha. Bahrain and Egypt joined them. It was the most severe crisis within the Arab bloc in recent memory, and through it all, Riyadh and Abu Dhabi stood united. Their crown princes even earned a nickname, the 2 MBSs, Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia and Mohammed bin Zayed of the UAE. Analysts called it the bromance. They coordinated on everything: oil policy through OPEC, military interventions across the region, economic strategies for the future. When one moved, the other followed. The Gulf Cooperation Council operated under their dual leadership. Saudi money combined with Emirati ambition created a power structure that seemed unbreakable. They were more than partners. They were architects of a regional order designed to preserve Sunni monarchies, contain Iranian influence, and manage the chaotic aftermath of the Arab Spring. But beneath this unity, cracks were forming. Different visions for Yemen's future, diverging approaches to Israel, competing economic ambitions. Or what seemed like tactical disagreements were actually the early tremors of a strategic earthquake that would soon split the Gulf's most powerful alliance right down the middle. The divergence started in Yemen, slowly at first, then catastrophically. Both countries entered the war in 2015 with the same stated enemy, the Houthi rebels. But somewhere along the way, their strategies took fundamentally different paths. Saudi Arabia kept its focus laser sharp on the Houthis. For Riyadh, this wasn't just about Yemen. It was about the 800-mile border they shared. Yemen's unity was essential for Saudi national security. A fractured Yemen meant instability right on their doorstep, a potential Iranian foothold that could threaten the kingdom's southern provinces. The UAE, however, saw different opportunities. Abu Dhabi started backing a group called the Southern Transitional Council, the STC. This organization wanted South Yemen to break away and become independent again, just like it was before 1990. The Emirates poured weapons, training, and money into the STC, helping them carve out their own mini-state in southern Yemen. For years, this was just an annoying disagreement. Saudi Arabia tolerated it. But in December 2025, the situation exploded. The UAE-backed STC launched a massive offensive, sweeping across southern and eastern Yemen. They captured huge swaths of Hadramaut and Al-Mahra, the oil-rich regions bordering Saudi Arabia. These weren't random provinces. Control of these areas meant control of critical ports, oil infrastructure, and most importantly, the Bab al-Mandab Strait, one of the world's most strategic shipping choke points. For Riyadh, watching Emirati-backed forces advance toward their border was terrifying. They didn't see a partner helping stabilize Yemen. they saw encirclement. Saudi defense analysts like Hisham al-Ghanem were clear. Riyadh views Yemen's eastern provinces, especially Hadramaut, as a core national security matter. The region's geography, strategic ports, and oil assets made it critical. Losing influence there, from Saudi Arabia's perspective, would be more than a local setback. It would be an existential threat to the kingdom's southern security architecture. But Yemen was just the symptom. The real disease, the fundamental split that tore these allies apart, had a name: Israel. In 2020, the UAE shocked the Arab world by signing the Abraham Accords, becoming one of the first Arab countries to normalize relations with Israel since Jordan in 1994. Saudi Arabia didn't join. That single decision became the defining fault line of the entire region. The UAE didn't just normalize with Israel, they went all in. Trade between the two countries surged from negligible to billions of dollars annually. Emirati and Israeli officials started coordinating on everything: intelligence sharing, military technology, economic partnerships, even tourism. The relationship became so close that by late 2025, diplomatic sources speaking to outlets like the Christian Science Monitor and the European Council on Foreign Relations reported something extraordinary. Saudi Arabia believed the UAE and Israel were pursuing not just cooperation, but a joint strategy, a coordinated effort to reshape the Middle East according to their vision. And what was that vision? According to multiple credible sources, Saudi officials concluded that the UAE and Israel were working together to fragment the Arab world. Look at the pattern. In Yemen, the STC that the UAE backs has openly offered Israel normalization in exchange for support for South Yemen's independence. Israel already maintained an intelligence presence on the Yemeni island of Socotra, which until December was under UAE control. In Sudan, the UAE supports the Rapid Support Forces, a brutal paramilitary group fighting the central government that Saudi Arabia backs. The RSF's campaign culminated in a horrific massacre at El Fasher. The Saudis see this as the UAE destabilizing a neighboring country to gain influence. Then came the moment that crystallized everything. On December 26, 2025, Israel became the first country in the world to officially recognize Somaliland as an independent state. Prime Minister Netanyahu signed the declaration himself, calling it an expansion of the Abraham Accords. Somaliland is a breakaway region that declared independence from Somalia in 1991. For over 3 decades, no UN member state recognized it, until Israel. The UAE had long maintained a major presence there, building a military base at Berbera port, pumping investment into the region's infrastructure. When Saudi Arabia joined scores of Arab and Muslim countries in condemning Israel's recognition, the UAE's name was conspicuously absent. Riyadh noticed. They noticed the silence when there should have been Arab solidarity. They noticed that Israel was recognizing a separatist region where the UAE has massive investments in military infrastructure. Saudi Arabia drew a conclusion. This is coordinated. This is a pattern. Yemen, Sudan, Somaliland, and potentially Syria, where reports suggest the UAE and Israel are cooperating to support Druze separatist groups. Riyadh sees a deliberate strategy of fragmentation, of breaking apart existing states to create smaller, more manageable pieces that can be influenced and controlled. The European Council on Foreign Relations documented this Saudi perception extensively. Saudi officials believe strategic alignment between the UAE and Israel amounts to attempted encirclement. They're coordinating an expansion of defense alliances with countries external to the Gulf, specifically to contain what they see as an increasingly hegemonic Israel and to weaken Emirati regional reach. This isn't paranoia. The evidence is substantial. Israel and the UAE have developed deep cooperation across multiple domains. The I-2U2 framework, launched in July 2022, brought together India, Israel, UAE, and the United States. On paper, it focuses on economic cooperation, renewable energy, food security, technology partnerships. But scratch the surface and the strategic dimension is obvious. India brings a massive economy and technological capability. Israel brings cutting-edge military technology and intelligence expertise. The UAE brings financial capital and strategic ports. Together, they're building what some analysts call a trans-regional order that fundamentally challenges the traditional power structure Saudi Arabia has led for decades. The I-2U2 partnership isn't just talk. It's concrete, measurable, and expanding. On January 19, 2026, just weeks ago, UAE President Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed visited India. The agreements they signed were extraordinary in scope. A letter of intent on a strategic defense partnership framework, a $3 billion liquefied natural gas deal, and a commitment to double bilateral trade to $200 billion by 2032. $200 billion. That's not a photo opportunity. That's a full economic and strategic realignment. India and the UAE are locking in a partnership that spans energy, defense, technology, and trade. They're coordinating on regional security, and most importantly, they're united by a shared vision. For India, this makes perfect sense. The UAE is not merely an energy partner or commercial hub. It's a frontline state in the security of the Indian Ocean and the Gulf, a region through which India's trade, diaspora, and energy lifelines pass. For Abu Dhabi, India offers scale, technology, and strategic depth without the ideological baggage that often accompanies Western security frameworks. What gives this axis real weight is Israel. The India-UAE defense relationship cannot be understood in isolation from the deepening trilateral convergence with Jerusalem. They're conducting joint military exercises, defense industrial collaboration, maritime security operations in the Arabian Sea, intelligence sharing, and cooperation in emerging domains like cyber and space. This isn't symbolic, it's grounded in capability and interoperability. The India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor project fits within this design, connecting India to Europe through the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Israel. It's meant to create a unified front against what they see as hybrid threats and digital subversion in the region. From Riyadh's perspective, this looks like strategic encirclement. To their east, the UAE and its ally India. To their west, Israel expanding influence. To their south, Yemen, where the STC backed by the UAE is making moves. Everywhere they look, this alignment seems to be working against them. Saudi Arabia decided they needed their own answer. On September 17, 2025, Saudi Arabia and Pakistan signed the Strategic Mutual Defense Agreement in Riyadh. This wasn't a vague cooperation pact. This was modeled on NATO's Article 5, the collective defense clause that says an attack on one member is an attack on all. The language is stark. Any aggression against one country will be treated as aggression against both. Pakistan brings nuclear weapons to this partnership. Let that sink in. Saudi Arabia just formalized a defense treaty with a nuclear-armed state. Pakistani Defense Minister Khawaja Asif even hinted that Pakistan's nuclear capabilities would be available under the pact, though he later walked it back after international uproar. But the message was sent. Then, in January 2026, Turkey entered talks to join the Saudi-Pakistan Defense Pact. Turkey, a NATO member with one of the most powerful militaries in the Middle East, a country that has been at odds with Saudi Arabia for years over everything from the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi to their support for opposite sides in Libya and Syria. Yet suddenly, they're talking about joining a mutual defense alliance together. Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan confirmed talks are ongoing. Some reports say a draft agreement is already prepared after 10 months of negotiations. Whether it's finalized or not, the very fact that these discussions are happening signals a massive realignment. The three countries bring complementary strengths: Saudi money, Pakistani nuclear capability and military manpower, Turkish conventional military power and defense industry. Together, observers are calling it an Islamic NATO, though that term is somewhat misleading since most Muslim countries aren't part of it and religion isn't really the driving factor. But the comparison to NATO is apt in one sense. This is about collective security. This is about creating a military bloc that can stand against the other bloc, the Abrahamic coalition versus the Islamic coalition. What's remarkable is that this isn't about the traditional Sunni-Shia divide anymore. For decades, the core tension in the Middle East was between Sunni Arab states led by Saudi Arabia and Shiite Iran. That was the organizing principle of regional politics, but that framework is dead. Iran has been severely weakened by Israel's campaign against Hezbollah and Hamas. The so-called axis of resistance that Iran built across Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and Gaza is in tatters. Hezbollah's leadership has been decimated. Hamas is shattered. For the first time in 4 decades, Iran's regional influence is at its lowest point. Into that vacuum, 2 new blocs are emerging. The Abrahamic coalition, centered on the UAE, Israel, and India with American support, and the Islamic coalition led by Saudi Arabia with Pakistan and potentially Turkey. These aren't just different alliances, they represent fundamentally different visions for what the Middle East should be. The Abrahamic coalition believes in using military force and technological superiority to maintain stability. They're building mutual defense frameworks based on collective security. They see strength as the path to peace, echoing Netanyahu's description of Israel needing to be like Sparta. They're willing to challenge existing borders and support non-state actors if it serves their strategic interests. The Islamic coalition prioritizes sovereignty, legitimacy, and political coalitions. They're defending existing borders against what they see as fragmentation strategies. They're building frameworks based on collective security but anchored in Islamic solidarity, even if it's more rhetorical than theological. They see Israel as a destabilizing expansionist power whose regional ambitions need to be balanced against. The flashpoint separating these camps more than anything else is the Palestinian issue. The UAE normalized with Israel through the Abraham Accords and essentially sidelined the Palestinian question. Saudi Arabia has refused. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has made it crystal clear. No Palestinian state, no normalization. This isn't just principle, it's about legitimacy and regional leadership. The implications of this split are enormous and immediate. Every regional conflict is becoming a proxy battlefield between these 2 camps. In Sudan, the Saudi-backed Sudanese armed forces continue fighting the UAE-backed Rapid Support Forces, devastating the country. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman reportedly urged the Trump administration in November 2025 to increase pressure on the UAE over its Sudan role. In Somalia, the split over Somaliland recognition has created new fault lines. In Syria, competing visions for the post-Assad future are colliding, with Saudi Arabia backing the new government while reports suggest the UAE and Israel support Druze separatists. In Libya, old divisions are reactivating with the UAE backing General Khalifa Haftar. For other countries in the region, this is a nightmare. Egypt has deep ties with both Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Egyptian officials publicly affirm total support for Riyadh's position on Yemen, but Egypt also depends heavily on Emirati investment and financial support. They're being forced to walk a delicate tightrope. The same goes for Bahrain, Jordan, and other Arab states. The old Gulf unity is gone. The idea of a unified GCC stance on regional issues is dead. In September 2025, after years of no contact following various disputes, UAE President Mohammed bin Zayed visited Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. There was brief momentum for creating a unified Arab Gulf front. That momentum is now completely destroyed. The personal relationship between the two crown princes, once described as a bromance, has collapsed. And in the Gulf, personal relationships between rulers often matter more than institutional frameworks. When the two MBSs were aligned, they could coordinate everything. Now they're on opposite sides. For Israel, this split creates both opportunities and serious concerns. The UAE remains a close, committed partner. The relationship has only deepened since October 7, 2023, but Saudi normalization, which once seemed inevitable, now looks increasingly unlikely. Israeli officials are privately expressing doubt that Saudi normalization will happen anytime soon. Bloomberg reported in early February 2026 that Israel is dismayed by what it sees as hostile Saudi moves. The defense pact with Pakistan, talks with Turkey, public criticism of Israel, the shift in Saudi media toward more anti-Israel rhetoric. For Israel, losing the possibility of Saudi normalization is a huge strategic setback. Saudi Arabia is the largest Arab economy, the birthplace of Islam, the leader of the Sunni world. Normalization with Riyadh would have been transformative, opening doors for other Arab states. Now that door appears to be closing, possibly for years or even permanently. The United States faces its own headache. Washington has close relationships with both Saudi Arabia and the UAE. The Biden administration tried for years to broker Israel-Saudi normalization. That effort failed. Now the Trump administration is taking a different approach, apparently accepting that Saudi normalization isn't happening near term and giving Saudi Arabia weapons and military support without demanding normalization as the price. For global trade, the split threatens corridors like the India-Middle East-Europe corridor that requires Saudi-UAE cooperation. The European Union is already looking at alternative routes through Oman to de-risk their connectivity projects. For oil markets, the split could undermine OPEC Plus coordination. If Saudi Arabia and the UAE can't agree on regional security, can they agree on production quotas? The Middle East is entering a new era, not defined by the old Sunni-Shia divide, not organized around containing Iran, but shaped by competition between two blocs with fundamentally incompatible worldviews. The Abrahamic coalition versus the Islamic coalition, the UAE's choice of Israel versus Saudi Arabia's rejection of Israel. The December 30th bombing wasn't just an airstrike, it was the moment the divorce went public. The moment the Gulf's most powerful partnership shattered. And the reverberations will reshape Middle Eastern geopolitics for the next generation. The question now isn't whether this competition will define the region's future. It's whether it can be managed without exploding into open war.